Let's start by reviewing how to multiply two numbers. Here we have 25 times 15, and you can think of this as 25, you're multiplying by 5, and then you're multiplying by 1. So we're going to start with the 5 first and multiply the 5 times 5. And we would get 25, so we will put the 5 down and carry the 2. And then we're going to do 5 times 2, which is 10, and of course add the 2 that we already have, which would be 12. Since we are done with the 5, I'm going to put my placeholder here and move on to the 1. So my first step is to do 1 times 5, which is going to equal 5, and then 1 times 2, which will equal 2. And my final step is to add both of these numbers. So I would get 5, 7, and 3, and my answer is 375. Let's look at another example, 237 times 42. First I'll multiply 237 by 2. And so first 2 times 7 is 14, so I will write the 4 and carry the 1. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, and then 2 times 2 is 4. Now since I'm done with the units digit, I will put a placeholder there, and now I'm moving on to 237 times 4. So 4 times 7 is 28. Put the 8 down, carry the 2. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. And 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. And my last step is to add the numbers together. So we have 4, 15. So my answer is 9,954. When we're multiplying decimals, our first step is to just multiply like we did on our past two problems. We're going to ignore the decimal points completely. And so 5 times 5 is 25. I put the 5, carry the 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Second line, I put my placeholder. I have 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 2 is 2. So then I add up my two numbers, and I get 375. My second step is to count the decimal places in both of my original numbers. So what I mean is, if we look at the first number, which is 2 and 5/10, I can see that I have one number behind the decimal point. So this number has one decimal place. So I'm just going to make a note of that this is 1. This number has 2 behind the decimal point. So since I'm multiplying, that means my answer needs to have 3 numbers or digits behind the decimal point. And so once you've figured that out, your step 3 is to put your decimal point in your answer. And the way to do that is start at the back of the number and move however many places you counted. So here we had 3, so I will move to the left 3 places, and my answer is 375 hundredths. For this problem, I've already solved it using our steps for multiplication, and now I'm up to the point where I need to put in my decimals. So I look at my first digit, and I have 1 number behind the decimal point. My second digit has 2 numbers behind my decimal point. So again, my answer should have 3 digits behind the decimal point. So I start at the back of the number, and I'm moving it to the left 3 places. And so my answer is 38 and 341 hundredths. Another example you may come across is having to put the decimal point in the product of a multiplication problem. So here are some examples. In our first one, the answer is already put here, but we need to add a decimal point. And I can figure this out without re-solving my multiplication. I look at both my digits and calculate how many numbers are behind the decimal point. So in this first number, there is 1, and this has 0 because there is no decimal. And so since I only have one number behind the decimal point, I know in my answer I need one digit behind the decimal point. So starting at the end, I would move it one place to the left, and that is where my decimal point would go. For the second problem, I have 2 digits for my first number and 0 for my second. So I know in my answer I should have 2 digits behind the decimal point, which means my decimal would go right after the 7. The third problem, I have 2 in my first number and 2 in my second number, which means my answer should have 4 digits behind the decimal point, meaning it goes right in front of the 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you should be ready to try on your own questions.